Every opioid explained. Opioids are some of the most powerful drugs ever discovered. Substances capable of eliminating pain, creating intense feelings of comfort, slowing the body, and in high enough doses, stopping breathing entirely. For thousands of years, humans have searched for ways to reduce suffering, and few discoveries have changed medicine more than opioids. But despite often being grouped together, not all opioids are the same. Some come directly from a flower, some are modified versions of those natural compounds, and others are created entirely inside laboratories. Yet nearly all of them work by targeting the same system inside the brain. The opioid receptors, tiny structures capable of dramatically altering pain, emotion, reward, and even survival itself. From ancient opium harvested thousands of years ago to synthetic opioids like fentanyl, this is the story of every major opioid. Opium. The story begins with a flower, the opium poppy. At first glance, and it doesn't appear particularly remarkable. A delicate plant with thin stems, soft petals, and round seed pods swaying in the wind. But hidden inside those pods is a substance that would alter human history. As the plant matures, a milky white sap begins forming inside the seed pod. When the pod is carefully scored, that sap slowly leaks out, thick, sticky, almost like liquid resin. As it dries, it darkens into a brown paste. This substance is known as opium. For thousands of years, people discovered that consuming opium could dramatically change the way they felt. Pain became weaker, stress seemed distant, the body relaxed, and emotional discomfort often faded into the background. For someone suffering injury, illness, or chronic pain, the effects could feel extraordinary. Ancient civilizations across Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, China, and many other regions would eventually use opium in one form or another. Some smoked it, some ate it, some brewed it into mixtures and medicines. Long before modern science existed, humans had already discovered one of the most powerful pain-relieving substances on Earth. But nobody understood why it worked, because hidden inside opium were chemicals far more powerful than the substance itself, chemicals that scientists would eventually isolate. And one of those chemicals would completely transform medicine: morphine. In the early 1800s, scientists successfully extracted morphine from opium for the first time. One of opium's most powerful active ingredients could be isolated and used directly. And compared to raw opium, the effects were far more predictable, far more powerful, and far more useful for medicine. As morphine enters the bloodstream, it begins traveling throughout the body, eventually reaching the brain. There, it attaches itself to opioid receptors, almost like a key fitting perfectly into a lock. The moment those receptors become activated, changes begin occurring throughout the nervous system. Pain signals traveling through the body become weaker. The brain pays less attention to discomfort. Muscles begin relaxing. Physical tension decreases. And for many users, a warm feeling of comfort slowly begins spreading throughout the body. Severe pain that once dominated a person's attention can begin fading into the background. For some people, it feels almost as if suffering itself is becoming quieter. The effects don't usually arrive like an explosion. Instead, many describe a gradual wave, a slow spreading warmth, a sense of heaviness, a feeling that the body no longer needs to fight against pain. For patients recovering from major surgery, serious injuries, or terminal illnesses, morphine became revolutionary. For the first time in history, extreme pain could often be controlled with remarkable effectiveness. But morphine also revealed something important about opioids. The same receptors responsible for pain relief are closely connected to reward and pleasure, meaning the brain begins adapting. Over time, the same amount of morphine may feel less effective. Higher doses may become necessary, and eventually, dependence can develop. A pattern that would appear again and again throughout the history of opioids. Because morphine wasn't just the first modern opioid, it became the blueprint for nearly every opioid that followed. Codeine, hidden within opium alongside morphine, is another important compound, codeine. Compared to morphine, codeine is considerably weaker, but that weakness would eventually make it one of the most widely used opioids in the world. For decades, millions of people received codeine for pain, injuries, and even persistent coughing. Because, unlike morphine, its effects are often more subtle. As codeine enters the body, it begins traveling through the bloodstream, eventually reaching the liver, and something interesting happens. Part of the codeine is converted into morphine, meaning codeine acts almost like a delayed version of its far more powerful relative. As those opioid receptors begin activating, pain slowly becomes less noticeable, the body starts relaxing. Physical discomfort fades slightly into the background, and for some users, a mild feeling of comfort appears. Not an overwhelming rush, not a dramatic wave, just a gentle reduction in pain and discomfort. Many users describe feeling calmer, more relaxed, sometimes sleepy, sometimes unusually comfortable. Because of its milder effects, codeine became one of the most common opioid medications ever prescribed. But despite being weaker, the same risks still exist. Because every opioid works through the same system, and repeated exposure can eventually cause tolerance and dependence, making codeine far more powerful than many people realize. Heroin. By the late 1800s, scientists were searching for ways to improve morphine. The goal seemed simple: create something safer, something less addictive, something better. Instead, they accidentally created one of the most infamous drugs in history, heroin, chemically known as diamorphine. At first, many believed heroin would solve the problems associated with morphine. Early advertisements even promoted it as a medical breakthrough. But there was one major problem. Heroin reaches the brain incredibly quickly, much faster than morphine itself, and that speed changes everything. As heroin enters the bloodstream, it rapidly crosses into the brain. Within moments, it is converted back into morphine, flooding opioid receptors throughout the nervous system. Users often describe the initial effects as a powerful rush, a sudden wave moving throughout the body, warmth spreading through the chest, relaxation flowing through the limbs, muscles becoming heavy, physical tension melting away. For many users, the outside world suddenly feels less important. Stress becomes distant, anxiety fades, worries become quieter, and for a brief period, everything can feel okay. But the same speed responsible for those powerful effects also makes heroin extraordinarily addictive, because the brain quickly begins associating heroin with intense reward. Over time, many users find themselves chasing the feeling they experienced during those first uses, a feeling that often becomes increasingly difficult to recreate. As tolerance develops, larger amounts become necessary, dependence grows stronger, and eventually, the drug can begin controlling the person rather than the other way around. Despite originally being created as a medical innovation, heroin would eventually become one of the most well-known opioids ever produced, Oxycodone. As medicine advanced, new opioids were developed from compounds originally found inside the opium poppy. One of the most successful was oxycodone. Unlike morphine, which occurs naturally, oxycodone is semi-synthetic, meaning scientists modified natural opioid compounds to create something new. The result was a powerful pain medication capable of treating moderate to severe pain. As oxycodone reaches the brain, opioid receptors begin activating, pain signals become quieter, physical discomfort decreases, muscles relax, and many users experience a noticeable feeling of well-being. For someone suffering significant pain, the relief can feel dramatic. The body becomes more comfortable, movement becomes easier, pain loses its grip on attention, and daily activities become manageable again. This effectiveness is one reason oxycodone became so widely prescribed. For years, it was viewed as one of the most important prescription pain medications available. But because it activates the brain's reward system, It carries many of the same risks seen with other opioids. Repeated use can lead to tolerance, dependence, and addiction, making oxycodone both a valuable medication and a source of major controversy. Hydrocodone. Hydrocodone emerged as another important prescription opioid, and in many ways, its effects resemble those of oxycodone. After entering the bloodstream, hydrocodone travels toward the brain, where opioid receptors begin responding. Pain gradually becomes less noticeable, the body starts relaxing, and discomfort begins fading into the background. Many users describe a sense of calmness, a reduction in physical stress, and an overall feeling that things simply feel easier. For patients dealing with injuries, surgical recovery, or chronic pain, these effects can provide meaningful relief, but like every opioid before it, hydrocodone comes with trade-offs, because the same receptors reducing pain are also influencing reward pathways deep within the brain, and repeated activation of those pathways can eventually change how the brain responds, creating the potential for dependence and addiction. Hydromorphone. As medicine continued advancing, researchers developed even more powerful opioid medications. One of those drugs was hydromorphone, a compound derived from morphine itself, but significantly stronger. Although the two drugs are closely related, hydromorphone can produce powerful pain relief using much smaller amounts. As hydromorphone enters the bloodstream, it rapidly reaches the brain. Opioid receptors begin activating, pain signals weaken, physical discomfort starts fading, and a deep sense of relaxation often follows. Many users describe a feeling of heaviness, almost as if the body is sinking into a chair, muscles loosen, movement feels slower, and attention begins shifting away from pain. For patients experiencing severe injuries, major surgeries, or advanced illnesses, these effects can be extremely valuable, but the increased potency also means greater risk. Because stronger opioids can produce stronger effects on breathing, and as opioid activity increases, the body's respiratory system begins slowing down as well, making careful dosing critically important. Oxymorphone, closely related to oxycodone, is another powerful opioid. Oxymorphone, like hydromorphone, it was designed to provide significant pain relief for patients experiencing severe pain. Once inside the body, oxymorphone activates opioid receptors throughout the nervous system. Pain becomes quieter, discomfort becomes more distant, and many users experience intense relaxation. Some describe feeling detached from physical discomfort, as though pain is still present somewhere, but no longer demanding attention. The body feels heavier, the mind becomes calmer, and sedation can become significant. Because of its potency, oxymorphone is generally reserved for situations where weaker pain medications may not be enough, but like every powerful opioid, its effects come with substantial risks, particularly when doses become too high. Buprenorphine. Unlike nearly every opioid discussed so far, buprenorphine behaves differently. Most opioids fully activate opioid receptors. Buprenorphine does not. Instead, it partially activates them, and that difference changes everything. As buprenorphine reaches the brain, opioid receptors still respond. Pain can decrease, withdrawal symptoms can improve, and cravings can become significantly weaker. But unlike drugs such as heroin or fentanyl, the effects eventually reach a limit. Researchers often refer to this as a ceiling effect, meaning larger doses do not continue increasing effects in the same dramatic way. This unique characteristic made buprenorphine one of the most important medications in modern addiction treatment. For many people struggling with opioid dependence, buprenorphine helps stabilize the brain, reducing cravings, reducing withdrawal, and helping individuals regain control over their lives. Today, it remains one of the most important tools used in opioid recovery programs around the world. Methadone. Another opioid with a unique purpose is methadone. At first glance, methadone appears similar to other opioids. It activates opioid receptors, reduces pain, and can produce many familiar opioid effects. But methadone behaves very differently over time, unlike heroin, which can create powerful effects very quickly. Methadone works much more gradually. Its effects develop slowly and often last far longer. Rather than creating an intense rush, many users describe a more stable feeling, a smoother effect, one that remains consistent throughout the day. This made methadone incredibly useful for addiction treatment, because instead of repeatedly cycling between intoxication and withdrawal, patients could maintain far more stable opioid levels, helping reduce cravings, helping reduce withdrawal symptoms, and helping lower overdose risk. For decades, methadone clinics have played a major role in treating opioid addiction worldwide. Fentanyl. Few opioids have become more widely known than fentanyl, and few have generated more fear. Unlike morphine or heroin or oxycodone, fentanyl is completely synthetic, created entirely inside laboratories. But despite not coming from the opium poppy, it still targets the same opioid receptors. The difference is its power, because fentanyl is extraordinarily potent. Tiny amounts can produce major effects. Amounts barely visible to the naked eye can have profound effects on the human body. As fentanyl reaches the brain, opioid receptors become intensely activated. Pain relief can occur rapidly. The body relaxes, sedation increases, and breathing begins slowing. For patients experiencing severe pain, especially in hospitals, these effects can be extremely useful. Fentanyl is commonly used during surgery, intensive care, and advanced pain management. But outside controlled medical environments, its potency becomes dangerous because the difference between a medical dose and a potentially fatal dose can be surprisingly small. As opioid activity increases, breathing becomes slower. Oxygen levels begin falling, and eventually, the brain may stop sending the signals necessary to breathe at all.